I learned early how to say the right words. I'm fine. It's nothing. I've got it under control. People believed me. That's the part that mattered. I wasn't lying in a dramatic way. I wasn't fabricating stories or hiding visible chaos. I was functional. Stable. Capable. I showed up on time. I handled responsibilities. I smiled when expected. From the outside, there was no crisis to address. Inside, everything was constantly on the verge of collapse. But collapse doesn't always look like falling apart. Sometimes it looks like holding yourself together so tightly that nothing moves anymore. I became very good at that. Whenever something hurt, I minimized it. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I reframed it. Whenever I sensed that something was wrong, I told myself it wasn't serious enough to matter. Other people had real problems. Other people struggled. Other people deserved concern. I was just tired. Just stressed. Just overthinking. That narrative saved me for a while. It allowed me to function without asking for help. It kept questions away. It protected me from vulnerability, which I had learned to associate with loss of control. I didn't want to be the person who needed things. I wanted to be the person who handled things. So I handled them. I handled disappointment by swallowing it. I handled loneliness by staying busy. I handled fear by pretending it was logic. I told myself I was resilient. I didn't realize I was disappearing. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending you're okay. Not the kind that sleep fixes. The kind that settles into your bones because you never let anything fully register. You can't process what you don't acknowledge. So I didn't acknowledge much. When people asked how I was doing, I answered automatically. When they praised my strength, I accepted it. When they said they admired how together I seemed, I took it as confirmation that the performance was working. Performances become dangerous when they start replacing reality. I noticed it in quiet moments. Times when there was nothing to distract me, nothing to manage, nothing to respond to. The silence felt heavy, almost hostile. I would reach for my phone, a task, a thought, anything to avoid sitting with myself too long. Because when I did, a strange pressure built in my chest. Not sadness. Not panic. Something more diffuse, like a warning system that had been ignored for too long. I told myself that everyone feels this way sometimes. That adulthood is about endurance. That no one is truly okay all the time. That may be true. But it became an excuse. I began to confuse survival with health. As long as I was functioning, I assumed I was fine. As long as I wasn't falling apart, I told myself nothing was wrong. I set the bar so low that collapse was the only thing that would have counted as evidence. And I wasn't collapsing. I was just shrinking. I stopped talking about certain things because I didn't know how to explain them without sounding dramatic. I stopped admitting confusion because I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I stopped naming dissatisfaction because I couldn't justify it. On paper, my life made sense. Inside, it felt increasingly unreal. I remember a moment that should have been ordinary. Someone asked me what I wanted, not in a grand sense, just casually. And I felt a pause stretch too long. I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't have desires, but because I had trained myself to dismiss them so quickly that I no longer recognized them as real. That scared me. But instead of stopping, I doubled down. I became more composed. More efficient. More controlled. If I was going to feel hollow, at least I would do it competently. People don't question someone who looks fine. They assume you are. And when everyone assumes you're fine, you start to feel like breaking down would be an inconvenience, something you don't have the right to do. So you keep going. Day after day. With a quiet, unspoken agreement between you and the world, you won't ask. I won't tell. I didn't realize how much energy that agreement was costing me until I reached a point where even pretending felt heavy. Not impossible. Just unsustainable. I had built a life where everything depended on me not being honest, especially with myself. And the most frightening part wasn't that I was struggling. It was that I had no language left to describe what I was feeling without breaking the illusion that I was fine. That's when the first crack appeared. Not a breakdown. A doubt. If I have spent my entire life convincing everyone, including myself, that I'm okay, what happens when I finally admit that I'm not? Once the doubt appeared, I tried to silence it the same way I had silenced everything else. By staying functional. I told myself that questioning how I felt was dangerous. That if I opened that door, I wouldn't know how to close it again. So I stayed busy. Productive. Reliable. I filled my days with structure and obligation, convinced that momentum was the same as stability. It worked, for a while. From the outside, nothing changed. I kept showing up. I kept delivering. I kept responding to messages, meeting expectations, fulfilling roles. If anything, I became even more dependable. I gave people fewer reasons to worry. Inside, the pressure intensified. Pretending you're fine requires constant maintenance. You have to monitor your tone, your expressions, your reactions. You have to intercept emotions before they surface. You have to rewrite your internal narrative in real time. That level of control is exhausting. I noticed how tense my body had become without me realizing it. How shallow my breathing was. How often my jaw clenched when I thought no one was watching. My body knew something was wrong long before my mind allowed it. I started waking up already tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, the kind that comes from carrying yourself through every moment without rest. Even relaxation felt performative. I couldn't just rest, I had to rest correctly, efficiently, without falling apart. I didn't give myself permission to feel bad unless I could justify it. And justification became harder. Nothing was wrong enough. I wasn't in crisis. I wasn't failing. I wasn't visibly unhappy. Compared to others, my problems seemed small, almost embarrassing. That comparison kept me quiet. I told myself, other people are dealing with real pain. You can handle this. But what I was handling wasn't a situation. It was a state. A constant low-grade distress that never peaked but never resolved. A sense of being slightly misaligned with my own life, all the time. I lived in a perpetual state of, almost okay. That's a dangerous place to stay. Because, almost okay doesn't trigger help. It doesn't demand change. It lets you survive indefinitely while slowly draining everything meaningful. I began to realize how much of my identity was built around being fine. People came to me because I was calm. Because I didn't overreact. Because I didn't burden them with my emotions. I liked that role. It made me feel valuable. But it also meant there was no space for me to fall apart, even privately. I didn't know how to stop being composed without feeling like I was failing at something essential. I had become afraid of my own honesty. The thought of admitting that I wasn't okay felt like admitting I had been lying, not just to others, but to myself. It felt like unraveling a carefully constructed image that everything depended on. So I postponed honesty the same way I had postponed everything else. Later. When things slow down. When I have more space. When I'm stronger. Later never came. Instead, I began noticing small leaks in the performance. Moments when my patience snapped faster than usual. When something insignificant felt disproportionately heavy. When I felt an urge to disappear for no clear reason. I dismissed those signs. I told myself I was just tired. But tiredness doesn't explain everything. One night, alone, I felt something I couldn't reframe away. A sudden wave of emptiness, not dramatic, not loud, just undeniable. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was the absence of anything that felt grounding. I realized then that I didn't feel connected to my own life. I was living it competently, but not consciously. I was managing myself instead of inhabiting myself. That realization scared me more than any breakdown would have. Because it meant that even if nothing ever went wrong externally, I would continue like this, functioning, composed, slowly hollowing out. I thought about what would happen if I finally told the truth. Not the whole truth. Just a small one. I'm not actually fine. The thought alone made my chest tighten. I imagined the questions that would follow. The concern. The attention. The expectations. I didn't know how to receive any of that. Pretending I was fine had protected me from those demands. It had also isolated me completely. I saw then that the performance had outlived its usefulness. What had once helped me survive was now preventing me from living honestly. The strategy that kept me afloat was slowly pulling me under. I didn't know how to stop. I only knew that continuing exactly like this was no longer an option. Because the cost of pretending wasn't just exhaustion. It was losing access to myself. And without that access, no amount of stability, productivity, or composure could make my life feel real. The question wasn't whether I could keep pretending. I could. The question was whether I could survive the emptiness that pretending was creating. The first time I stopped pretending, nothing dramatic happened. No collapse. No intervention. No sudden clarity. Just a sentence spoken out loud, quietly, to the wrong person at the wrong moment: I'm not actually okay. As soon as I said it, I wanted to take it back. I felt exposed, clumsy, almost ashamed, as if I had broken an unspoken contract. The contract that said I was the strong one. The reliable one. The one who didn't need much. The world didn't end. But something inside me shifted. Because once you stop pretending in one place, the lie becomes louder everywhere else. I started noticing how often I defaulted to performance. How quickly I minimized myself. How instinctively I tried to reassure others before they even asked. That reflex didn't disappear overnight. Pretending had been my armor for so long that taking it off felt unsafe. Vulnerability wasn't relief, it was unfamiliar. But unfamiliar didn't mean wrong. I didn't suddenly become open with everyone. I didn't unload my feelings or ask for constant support. What changed was more subtle. I stopped correcting my own emotions before they fully formed. If something hurt, I let it hurt without immediately explaining why it shouldn't. If I felt tired, I allowed that fatigue to exist without turning it into a failure. If I didn't know how I felt, I stopped forcing an answer. That honesty was quiet. But it was real. I realized how much energy I had spent convincing myself that I was fine. How much of my life had been organized around avoiding concern, avoiding attention, avoiding the possibility that someone might look too closely. I had confused independence with isolation. And strength with silence. The hardest part wasn't admitting that I wasn't okay. It was accepting that I never had to be okay all the time in the first place. I had set an impossible standard for myself, one where worth depended on composure, where value depended on self-containment, where needing something meant failing at adulthood. That belief wasn't true. It was just familiar. I began to understand that pretending I was fine had once protected me. It kept me moving when stopping felt dangerous. It helped me survive moments where breaking down wasn't an option. I stopped judging that version of myself. Survival strategies don't become harmful because they were wrong, they become harmful because they're used too long. I didn't need to destroy the mask. I needed to stop living inside it. Little by little, I practiced honesty in small ways. I named discomfort without dramatizing it. I asked for space without apologizing. I let myself be quieter when I was tired instead of performing cheerfulness. Some people noticed. Some didn't. The world didn't rearrange itself around my truth. But I did. For the first time, my internal state and my external life started to resemble each other. I wasn't constantly translating myself anymore. I wasn't editing my emotions before allowing them to exist. That alignment brought something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not happiness. Not peace. Relief. The relief of no longer arguing with my own experience. I still have days when I slip back into pretending. When I default to "I'm fine" because it's easier, faster, less complicated. I don't punish myself for that anymore. Change isn't about purity. It's about awareness. The difference now is that pretending no longer feels invisible. I feel it when I do it. And I know I have another option. I can pause. I can be honest. I can choose presence over performance. If you're listening to this and you've built a life around being okay, not because you are, but because it's expected, I want you to hear this clearly: you don't have to fall apart to be.